Okay, so welcome back to Critical Weight Theory. And today we're going to look at one of the artists who shook the walls, bent the rules, and rewrote the soundtrack to people's lives. I'm Wade, and today we're talking about Bob Mould, the guy behind Hüsker Dü, the guy behind Sugar, the guy behind one of the most underrated, quietly massive solo careers in American rock. For over 40 years, Mold has made music that's raw, intense, and emotional, but pretty much never flashy. He's the kind of artist who puts everything into the song and nothing into the spectacle, really. So let's rewind back to the late 70s. Bob's just a college kid in St. Paul, Minnesota, but pretty soon he's forming Husker Du with drummer Grant Hart and bassist Greg Norton. At first, they're all speed and noise, part of the hardcore punk wave, but something's a little different. There's a little more melody creeping into the chaos. There's some extra storytelling, emotion, and ambition. By the mid 80s, albums like Zen Arcade and New Day Rising aren't just making noise, they're reshaping what punk can be. They lay the groundwork for alternative rock before the genre even had a name. You know, Nirvana, Foo Fighters, Green Day have all cited Husker Du as influences. And certainly there are some musicians out there who basically tried to use them as a blueprint because there are plenty of bands that sound something like Husker Du. Dave Grohl once said Bob Mould should be placed in the highest ranks of America's greatest songwriters and lyricists, and he's not wrong, at least if you ask a lot of the fans. And after Husker Du blew apart in 88, Mould didn't stop, he didn't even slow down. He released Workbook in 89. It was acoustic, introspective, sort of a 180 from his earlier work. And then Black Sheets of Rain in 90, bring back the volume and a little bit of the edge that was said to be sort of lacking in the previous album. He's always been walking the line between aggression and melody. And then came Sugar, his other band. Sugar's debut, Copper Blue, came out in 92 and it hit hard. There was some tight songwriting, catchy hooks, the same emotional intensity. Tracks like Changes are still some of the best examples of 90s alt rock done right. Critics loved it, fans loved it, and it still holds up. Now, admittedly, I didn't really listen to Bob Mould or Husker Du or Sugar for that matter when I was, younger. This is something that I've really discovered a little bit later in life. I sort of randomly first heard Husker Du on a punk rock compilation. I heard of the band, but I can't say that I listened to them when I was younger. So there really isn't quite the same nostalgia thing for me when I hear their songs. But nevertheless, I do see why people, well, I hear why people are impressed by his output. Bob never stayed in one lane in the late 90s, living in New York and leaning into his identity as a gay man. His music sort of took a left turn into electronica and dance. Albums like Modulate might have confused some fans, but for Mold, it was just another honest chapter in his musical journey, as they say. He eventually returned to loud guitars and Silver Age in 2012 and Blue Hearts in 2020. You know, a lot of people might say that Blue Hearts is one of his most political albums with a sense of urgency. And gee, I wonder why he would feel that in the year 2020. It's another sign that he's still out there, still evolving, still pissed off, still writing like it matters. That's how the songwriter is supposed to do it. And there's more than just the music. In the 90s, as I suggested, Bob came out publicly as a gay man, something that took courage in a scene that wasn't always welcoming. In interviews since, he's been open about what that moment meant to him. He once said, what took you so long to come out? Why didn't you do this a little sooner? It's a question he's had to live with, but he's answered it with his life and his work. His memoir, See a Little Light, The Trail of Rage and Melody, dives into all of this, his music, his struggles, his identity, and like his songs, I've heard that it doesn't flinch. I can't say I've read it myself because I don't have, I don't have enough time and money to read and, you know, just consume everything that's out there. But I've heard that it's a good book, so obviously you might want to check that out too. If you've never really listened to Bob Mould, now's the time. You can start with Zen Arcade or Copper Blue or Silver Age. If you want to hear his most recent album, uh, you might want to start there too. That would be a sensible way to approach, and then maybe work backwards. You can add him to a playlist with bands like The Replacement. That sort of genre would actually accommodate his music pretty well. You'll hear why so many call him a legend, even if he never called himself one. So, thanks for listening. If you liked this episode, hit follow. You can review it or just send it to someone who's overdue for, a little episode about Bob Mould. So, in future episodes, I'm sure I'll cover other artists who made noise, told the truth, and changed the game in some way. This time it was Bob Mould. Who knows what I'll cover in the future. And I also do, political episodes, and I talk about movies and TV shows, and sometimes just random odds and ends that seem interesting to me. So, go ahead and play the music loud. Continue listening out there somewhere beyond anyone knowing. I will leave you with that cryptic remark.